Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something I find absolutely fascinating, how the cataclysmic events of the 20th century literally shattered and then totally reshaped the English novel. We're going to look at how writers responded to massive global trauma, and we're doing it by zeroing in on the life and work of one of the most brilliant, razor-sharp literary minds of the era, Muriel Spark. So just think about this provocative question for a second. What actually happens to the stories we tell when the entire world order just collapses? When the old rules of society go up in smoke, well, the old rules of writing simply can't capture that new reality. Following all that global conflict, the stakes for human expression were incredibly high. Writers basically had to invent entirely new ways to make sense of a fractured world. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the shift to modernism, then look at Muriel Spark's life, dive into Miss Jean Brodie, unpack themes and techniques, and finish up with novels after the 60s. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The shift to modernism. Right, so before 1914, people kind of had this illusion of a stable, universal human nature. But the devastation of the First World War completely destroyed that old world order. And that birthed modernism, a movement where writers were desperately searching for new styles to reflect a broken world. Then, fast forward to 1945. The end of the Second World War, the nuclear bomb and all that widespread destruction ushered in what W.H. Auden called the Age of Anxiety. And in response to that, we saw this massive surge of new writing styles. We're talking political allegories from George Orwell, moral stories by Graham Greene, comic realism from Anthony Burgess, and these really deep explorations of female identity and freedom from authors like Doris Lessing and Iris Murdoch. And all this anxiety, it gave birth to postmodernism. This was experimental writing that consciously rejected traditional rules and symbols of authority. I mean, think about it. Authority had just led the world into an absolute nightmare. So writers embraced parody, pastiche, and these random, messy plots to reflect the chaos of real life. It really set the stage for radical new voices to step up. Which brings us to Section 2, Muriel Spark's life. Honestly, Muriel Spark's resume perfectly primed her to write complex novels about power and control. Born in Edinburgh in 1918, she later lived in Africa before working in British intelligence during World War II. And her specific department? Psychological warfare. She literally worked to camouflage anti-Nazi propaganda. That's wild, right? Then, in 1954, she converted to Roman Catholicism. She actually credited this shift with helping her see life as a whole rather than just disconnected events, which is what finally unlocked her ability to write novels. Moving on to Section 3, Miss Jean Brodie. Set in 1930s Edinburgh, her masterpiece, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, introduces us to a completely unconventional teacher who operates totally outside the official curriculum. She handpicks 6 young girls to form the Brodie set. Now, fun fact, the character is heavily based on Spark's own real-life teacher, Miss Christina Kay. Though, to be fair, her real teacher never had the scandalous love affairs or the political downfall that Brodie does. In the novel, Brodie demands absolute loyalty, she shares incredibly inappropriate details about her romantic life, and fills the girls' heads with her own extreme passions. She constantly tells her girls that they are the crème de la crème. Miss Brodie forces this very elitist identity onto them to basically cement a psychological hold over their impressionable minds. She views herself as this sort of deity presiding over them, dictating exactly who they are going to become. You see, Miss Brodie claims that education is, and I quote, a leading out of what is already there in a pupil's soul. But in reality, she doesn't respond to their innate gifts at all. She completely ignores them. Instead, she uses this philosophy as an excuse to just cram them full of her own beliefs, everything from art history to her downright dangerous political views. She's acting like a controlling author, basically trying to write the scripts of their lives for them. But of course, her plan backfires. The entire climax of the story rests on Sandy, a member of the Brodie set who has incredibly keen insight. Sandy observes the hypocrisy and the sheer danger of Miss Brodie's dictatorial grip, and ultimately she rebels. She betrays Miss Brodie to the headmistress, which forces the teacher into an early, disgraced retirement. So that theme of absolute control we were talking about, it violently collapses. Let's unpack that in Section 4, Themes and Techniques. Spark's literary techniques were directly connected to these postmodern themes of authority. She was a huge believer in brevity, using short stories and small groups of closely connected characters to reveal really deep human truths. But even more radically, she completely rejected chronological order. Through constant flash forwards, we see exactly how the girls' adulthoods turn out before they even finish school. By messing with time like this, Spark forces us to focus not on what happens, but why it happens. It centers everything entirely on that psychological clash of minds between Miss Brodie and Sandy. And this clash of minds, it is deeply rooted in religion. Miss Brodie operates a lot like a strict Calvinist god, acting as if destinies are already predestined, engaging in this guiltless manipulation, and feeling utterly justified in playing Providence. Sandy, on the other hand, rejects this controlling determinism. She secretly observes Miss Brodie's hypocrisy, shatters her teacher's ego, and ultimately turns to the redemptive nature of Roman Catholicism to embrace free will and break totally free from Brodie's suffocating grip. Now, on a historical level, Brodie's absolute control closely mirrors fascism. Set in the 1930s, we see Miss Brodie openly praising real-world dictators like Mussolini and Hitler. Spark uses this to represent the ultimate extreme of Brodie's desire for total control. It's important to note, Sandy doesn't betray Miss Brodie over some petty personal slight. She betrays her specifically because she realizes her teacher's fascist mindset is a dangerous, destructive force on young, impressionable minds. Stepping back to the big picture, Section 5, Novels after the 60s. So, following the 1950s, the massive cultural rebellion of the 1960s gave rise to something called metafiction. Basically, stories about writing stories. Writers became highly experimental during this time. They focused way less on traditional plots and more on the very rules of language itself. It was this wild, natural evolution from the postmodern rejection of authority. And storytelling kept shifting rapidly over the following decades. While the swinging 60s focused on that experimental language, the 1970s saw a return to themes of identity, heavily driven by post-colonial authors who were finally finding their voice. Then, moving from the highly commercialized culture of the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher right up to today, fiction began wrestling with modern consumerism, the gloom of lost empires, and an incredibly rich multiculturalism. Which really brings us to the vibrant landscape we have today. English literature has expanded globally, becoming truly multicultural and international. The modern era has been beautifully enriched by diverse, brilliant writers of varying cultural origins. Names you probably know, like Salman Rushdie, Vikram Seth, and Kazuo Ishiguro. The shattered novel of the post-war era didn't just put itself back together. It expanded to include the voices of the entire globe. So that leaves us with one final, provocative thought to take away from this explainer. Who is truly in the driver's seat of your destiny? Is it yourself? Is it society? Or is it some unseen author of your circumstances? Much like Miss Jean Brodie tried to be for her students. Muriel Sparks showed us that life and literature are a constant battle for control. I really hope this exploration sparked your curiosity to dive deeper into these incredible texts. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the stories you're told.